Just a bit of background. These stats are from 2018. The 2019 stats aren't fully collated yet, but there isn't a huge difference between 2018 and 2019. So over 500,000 first-time asylum seekers applied for international protection in the European Union in 2018. And as you can see from the figures there, Germany took about 28% of asylum seekers, then France, Greece, Spain, Italy, and the UK. So huge numbers of asylum seekers coming into the European Union. The main countries of origin are Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, Pakistan, and I suppose from the first three there you can see that these are essentially countries that are in the depths of war or are coming out of wars or have issues with serious human rights abuses. And with regards to getting status, then 37% of people who've applied for international protection have gotten their status, and that kind of fits with the Irish figure as well. It's about a third of people who apply for international protection actually get their status. This is an interesting chart. It just looks at I suppose the history of international protection in Ireland. If you look at the very left, in 1991, 9 people applied for asylum in Ireland. 10 years later, in 2001, we had 10,000 people applying for international protection. Again, I suppose this was during the Celtic Tiger, and huge amounts of people coming into Ireland. 10 years later, again in 2011, I suppose during the last recession, we had 1,200 people seeking asylum. At the moment, there's about 3,000 or 4,000 people a year seeking asylum. So that's just an interesting chart on the last, I suppose, 30 years of asylum in Ireland. So in 2018, there was 3,500 people applied for international protection, and that's was an increase on 2017. And we reckon that last year in 2019 there was a 60% increase. So, now this year, at the start of this year, there were large numbers of people seeking asylum, but obviously that has dropped off in the last 2 months due to people not being able to come into Ireland and people not being able to travel. So the numbers are still quite high. Almost 6,500 people were living in direct provision or emergency accommodation, and that figure is at the moment in and about 6,500 to 7,000 people living in direct provision, and over 700 of those have got refugee status, but they can't leave the direct provision system because they don't have any place to live. So that is becoming a problem for, I suppose, the authorities, people that have status but can't get accommodation. They're entitled to stay in direct provision for up to 1 year after getting their status, but after that, it's essentially they have to find some place to live. The average length of time that people spend in accommodation centres is 24 months. Now, anecdotally, that's a pretty, I suppose, conservative figure. There is stories of people spending 5 and 6 years up in direct provision, and sometimes people have been there for 8, 9, and even 10 years. So the state has to provide accommodation for people. So the state is under pressure to find accommodation for our people, and what's adding to it is the housing crisis. Now, things might be changed after we come out of the current crisis, but we'll just have to see with regards to how that's going to work. The main countries where people are coming from are Albania, Georgia, Syria, Zimbabwe, and Nigeria. And again, that was more or less the same for last year. This is just an overview of the direct provision centres. And again, as Fergus was saying, we'll be putting this presentation up on the NALA website, so it'll give you a better opportunity to go through the actual direct provision centres that are in your particular counties or your particular regions. There's a second slide of these as well. So these are the direct provision centres as of the 4th of November 2019, so just about 6 months ago. Even in Clare, since then, we've had another direct provision centre in Ennis, where we have 60 asylum seekers living there. So you can see there's quite a widespread. Clare, Cork, Dublin, Galway, Kerry. There's 6 in Kerry. And again, you know, it's countrywide, or the direct provision centres. If you look at Limerick there, the one in Mount Trenchard has closed, and a lot of those residents have been moved to other direct provision centres in the region. Some have gone to Ennis and other parts of Limerick. So again, looking at Louth, Tipperary, Waterford, Wicklow, Westmeath. So yeah, there's 39 centres, and on top, these are direct provision centres. There's also emergency accommodation, and these are often hotels or hostels where people are staying because they can't get a place in direct provision. So then they go into emergency accommodation. So the main part of this presentation is just showing you how the system works. I've gone through, I suppose, the numbers and where people are staying. So we've about 6,000 to 7,000 people seeking international protection or seeking asylum in Ireland, and most of them are living in direct provision centres scattered across the country. So to get refugee status, there are 5 grounds for refugee status: political opinion, race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group. So for instance, with regards to religion, you might be a Christian in a Muslim dominated country where you're being persecuted because you're a Christian, or vice versa. You might be a Muslim in a Christian dominated country where you're being persecuted for your religion, and therefore you can flee that particular country and seek international protection in a safe country like Ireland or UK or wherever you want to go. So you know, I could do a whole day's presentation on the various types of refugee status, and if that's something that people want, we can look at doing some other workshops on in this particular area. If you don't qualify as a refugee under any of these grounds, you can apply for what is called subsidiary protection. So subsidiary protection means you don't qualify as a refugee under the political, national, or racial grounds, but there are substantial grounds for believing that if you returned to your country of origin, that you would face a real risk of suffering serious harm. So you don't qualify as a refugee, but it might be very, very dangerous for you to go back to your country. If you don't qualify for refugee status or subsidiary protection, you can apply for permission to remain. And this is granted mainly on humanitarian or other compelling reasons. And you've probably seen stuff in the news maybe about teenagers or families that they've kids in secondary school and they've been issued with deportation orders. So an appeal is made to the minister that these families and these people are allowed to stay in Ireland on humanitarian grounds.